Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Tennis Channel Inside In. We're on the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. Mitch Michals from the Santa Monica studios talking remotely now. And who says there isn't much to talk about late September in the tennis world? Mark Petchey coming back to the show, settled into his place back overseas after an outstanding Laver Cup on his end and the production team's end. Mark, welcome back to the show. I always know we can find stuff to talk about in the tennis world. This time we don't have to look too hard, but thank you for coming back.
It's always a pleasure. I think even I tell you what, mid December get me back on. I'm sure we'll be talking about something then. It never
Yeah.
stops.
It doesn't. Just when you think you have some downtime, you don't, but we love it here on Tennis Channel Inside In. Starting with the last Laver Cup, it was a one-sided affair. The sixth edition in 7 years, won by Team World, their second. They've won the last two. You were at the event. Before we get into the tennis and all the drama that went down, what is that event like from the broadcaster's perspective? You getting to do a lot of the sideline reporting too, which is not normally done at all in tennis, talking to coaches, talking to players mid-match, but what was the event like, the vibe around Vancouver, which was a great host city? If you could explain that experience.
As an event from a production point of view, it's arguably, well, I don't even think it's arguably, I think it's probably the best out there because, you got 46 cameras, you've got so much access backstage to the players. They're obviously a lot more relaxed in terms of what they're willing to sort of let you see, what they're willing to say. It's a super serious event from that point of view. I think it does, and it has done ever since Prague in 2017, showcase tennis in a very kind of different way, very upbeat, very high tempo. I think it's become, a good template for how people can actually do tennis. And from a fan point of view, almost 20,000 people there on a Friday afternoon and Friday evening when Coldplay were there. I think it's testament just to how much tennis fans, certainly in cities like Vancouver that don't have a lot of tennis, absolutely gravitate towards the event. I mean, you can always make the argument. You looked at Davis Cup the week before. Obviously, you had Felix and Milos warming the bench this week. Milos warming the bench, Felix playing great again, which was obviously awesome to see. But, Davis Cup had a big problem on the days when obviously nations that weren't playing at home to fill stadiums. Here you had a situation at Laver Cup where you didn't have any home players and it was absolutely rammed to the rafters. So, for me, this year was a big litmus test in terms of what the fans wanted, and they came out in their droves.
Yeah, that's a big point that I didn't really think of. These non-tennis tournament hosting cities, getting an event is huge. Having a local guy, obviously, but the schedule, I mean, we know it's just there's so much fighting going on for any sliver of real estate. So to have an event in Vancouver, which is a great sports town, was big in itself. And that, the having Felix play, which we can get into, is another part of this. And that's kind of where I don't want to say existential crisis, but what goes on forward for this event, which was founded on Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal being doubles partners. So I got to talk to you about the Felix Monfils match because that kind of was, I think, the popping off point of some different approaches, shall we say, and the gist of it being, and you can expand on this, but Felix taking it a little more serious than Monfils, who says, "Look, I'm here to have fun. I want to entertain the fans." Felix didn't necessarily agree with that approach. It's all water under the bridge. They all like each other. We know that, but that moment was kind of a tipping off point between, I guess, two different perspectives on this Laver Cup.
Yeah, it was a tipping point for Gail. I don't think it was a tipping point for 99% of us that have watched and played and been involved in this event ever since 2017. That was always the narrative from the people that were negative about the event. It's a glorified EXO. That's all it is. And ever since the Prague sort of finale, everybody realized just how important the event was to the players that were there. I'm not going to tell everyone to have whatever perspective they want, but the reality is, for all of us that have been involved with this event since day one, it has been super serious. There have been moments of genuine tension, real animosity between the teams. Geneva was a classic case in point, and I think Gail perhaps just got the wrong end of the stick at that particular moment. And obviously things fell apart for him and Team Europe, to be honest, from that point on. This event cannot thrive on it being an exhibition, and it hasn't done. It hasn't built the kind of theme, and it hasn't kind of built the reputation on it being an EXO. And that was obviously a disappointment for Europe, and well capitalized on it big time.
Yeah, absolutely. We know that the head-to-heads count, and say what you want about it. The head-to-heads count going forward. The money is great for the players that are there. They're definitely in it to win it. And the analogy I draw, Mark, is this is a very good idea. It's like the NHL, NBA All-Star games where the top players are there. It's a great idea. It's a great concept to get these best players in the world all together. But the point that I'm making is you have to continually tweak these things. You have to keep making it better. You can't just have one edition of the Laver Cup for infinity. So that's going to be the challenge I think that this tournament has. How do we keep the players interested? How do we keep improving this event?
Oh, I think it's a great point. I think there's a number of things that obviously that will be getting sort of thrown around, I'm sure, in the discussion rooms where they're above our pay grade, Mitch. But there will
Yeah.
definitely be definitely some discussions. Obviously, going to Berlin next. I think the point that you made and I kind of made at the start, it's very valuable to tennis to have this event go into particularly non-tennis playing cities. We know on the tour just how locked up things are for the big tournaments. It's very hard to get into other events. So, in other cities because of the way the Masters events are kind of done. So, from that point of view, it's for me personally, that's where the Laver Cup has huge appeal. What it does need, of course, it needs all the top Europeans to play. And I think what we saw from Team World is that if you don't put out your strongest team, we're going to crush you and we're going to beat you hard and we're not going to care about it at all. And I hope that that is a kind of a really sort of big inflection point for the Europeans to get
Mhm.
involved again in Laver Cup from next year. The other discussion, Mitch, which is obviously going to get on the table at some point, you need to build a narrative. You need to build a story with a new event. I don't think Laver Cup would have survived if you'd done it once every 2 years or once every 4 years, a bit like the actual World Cup. I think you need to build a storyline with some great moments, which we've had through Roger and Rafa, from Novak playing, the great goodbye from last year, Rafa and Roger playing doubles together, Novak and Roger playing doubles together. Moments that you won't ever really see on the main tour have happened at Laver Cup, and you needed to make those happen very quickly. There has to be a discussion about whether potentially with the congested tennis calendar that this event is going to work better every 2 years rather than annually.
Yeah, no, those are great points. It's hard to believe that 2 years ago, Team Europe's roster, they were all top like 10, top 15 guys,
Yeah.
literally every single one. And this year they score exactly one win with Casper Ruud over Tommy Paul. That's it. Gets shut out regardless. And just kind of a follow up to that, do you think that the tennis calendar can work with tournaments like the Davis Cup, Billie Jean King Cup on the women's side, and the Laver Cup all in harmony? Or do you think we're going to have to start contracting some of these events?
Well, I don't think they're going to work in harmony.
Yeah,
You've been around this game long
yeah,
enough. They're never going to
yeah,
work in harmony. Can they survive
yeah,
together?
yeah.
Can they be best of enemies? Possibly. Um, Listen, I think it's a great question. I'm kind of at the point where I'm almost feel like we could draw the curtain down on Davis Cup. I'm almost feel like for me, unless they change it dramatically, it's getting to the point of being an event that actually is in risk of being kind of laughable. I mean, where it's being held in Malaga this year with no Spain in the draw is, what World Cup would ever host a World Cup without having their own nation at it? I mean, it's absolutely ludicrous what's gone on. And that's why I think Laver Cup, when you look at it over 3 days, selling out to the degree that they did, not necessarily with loads of home players, just goes to show the success of that formula. So that formula is successful. That's a keeper. Are the other two's keepers? I'm not convinced they are.
As far as the tennis went, on the Laver Cup, it was exceptional, like we said, by Team World. And you do see which types of players thrive at these events. Francis Tiafoe, Taylor Fritz, now Ben Shelton, obviously. They love these events, Mark. They love the team element of it. They love being surrounded by players that are going to raise their energy. I don't think it's a coincidence that certain players on the Team World side are doing well.
Yeah, listen, you're 100% right. No question that those guys come into this kind of week and absolutely love it. They embrace it for everything that it is. They couldn't be closer. It looks like on the side of the court, the info that they're giving each other is absolutely spot on. Chris Eubanks was spectacular on the side of the court. Obviously, throw him into the mix. How good he's been in all facets of the game, not just between the lines, but obviously in the broadcasting booth as well. And he's taken that knowledge and he was passing it on. And And that's why I say Europe have got their hands full, and that's what's beautiful about this competition right now. You know, the Ryder Cup went through a period where in golf where it got very dull. The Americans were absolutely dominating, and people were switching off. They weren't really engaged. And then obviously Europe came back and has made that competition vibrant again. You know, from a storyline, Laver Cup needed what's happened in the last couple of editions to actually showcase the fact that this competition is gonna be something worth buying a ticket for, coming to. And that team world with that nucleus of players being that young is going to be something that is going to be very difficult to stop over the upcoming years. And tennis at the moment is just in the best place ever. I mean, I kind of catch myself saying that. On obviously we haven't seen much of Rafa this year. Rogers obviously stopped, and there was a real period where he felt as though we're going to go into a bit of a black hole here and try and make storylines, make tennis exciting, and we literally hit one of the greatest periods in terms of who is going to come through out of these group of players that we're watching and kind of dominate the landscape.
Yeah, it's exciting. I can't echo that sentiment enough. And Rod Laver endorsing Ben Shelton too. That's quite a weighty endorsement.
He's had a few endorsements, but that one's a little weightier than others.
Yeah, some good, some not so good, but hey, we love to see it. Well, and look, Roger Federer, one of the founders of this event, was there. It was good to see him chat with Jim Courier in between matches, saying maybe in the future I could be a captain of this event. I think that might be a foregone conclusion, but what was it like to see Roger at the event and still involved in the game more than anything?
Yeah, I think the fact that he's still involved in the game is obviously great for tennis. Number one, I mean, he is a rock star. He is one of those rock stars of tennis that when he's around, people go crazy. You can still see the appeal that he has. It's very important for tennis to keep Roger involved in the game as well. Whatever avenues that he decides to take, whether it's just purely through the vehicle of Laver Cup or whether it's other things, Roger being involved just puts the optics that much higher. You see his star status, you see him walking around, and you see just how important he is. So listen, I've never met anybody that seems happier, more optimistic, that just has this love of life, Mitch, that just radiates off him, and he is never different whenever I've seen him in the entirety of the last 20 plus years.
Yeah, I think it was Leif Shiras who said back in the day Borg was one of those guys that you'd walk into a room and people would just stare at him. I think Roger, would that be fair to say, has that same quality? Or he walks in and just
100%, he's got the same quality. I mean, it's like I said, it's crazy when he's walking around this event. I mean, it is obviously one of the great attractions for the fans. That's probably one of the reasons why some of them have come, because he's been their idol for so long. They want to catch a glimpse of him. He was super invested. He was there every day. He was doing absolutely everything around the scenes and around the park. Would all of us agree that we'd love to see him as captain sooner rather than later? 100%.
More with Mark Petchey here on Tennis Channel Inside In, the veteran broadcaster and former British #1 here on Tennis Channel Inside In. We've got a lot to discuss on the women's tour as well. Maria Sakkari gets that 1,000 level title in Guadalajara, which, there was a lot of adversity in her year, in her recent major success run. We know the field wasn't the deepest for a 1,000 level event, but you still have to get the job done, Mark. And she did it. And she found a way at altitude with some murky conditions to beat Caroline Dolehide in the final, Garcia in the semis. And we know confidence is key, and Sakkari finally has something to work with here.
Yeah, Mitch, you're absolutely right. Couldn't be happier for Maria. Obviously, had a couple of small stints with her coaching, and what a way to do it as well, off the back of the huge disappointment that she suffered at the US Open. Everybody knows the emotions. Listen, Maria wants it more than anybody else. She wants it. She gives every ounce of her being, every second of her day to tennis. She has sacrificed as much, if not more, than anybody else out there. And part of that comes with the pressure that obviously she puts on herself to try and make things happen. But the reality of the situation is that may well be the kind of lift that she needed in terms of a tournament win that will make her feel a little calmer at the back end of even bigger tournaments when obviously the opposition is going to be a little tougher.
And don't you think too, I mean, we're full on junkies. Like, we watch tennis all the time. A lot of people will ask on the outside after the US Open, like, what, not glorified, like, what's the point? Like, how is tennis still going? Like, it's hard to find interest. My counter to that would be, this is the type of story, right? You build your year, you build for next year, you build momentum even after the US Open. So if she has a successful Australia and beyond, I will look back to this moment and say this is where some stuff really started.
Listen, I think you're 100% correct. There's no question that for us that are as invested in the game as we are, these are the kind of sidebar stories that we look back on and talk about the fact that if that tournament hadn't been there, um, where would she have found that confidence from? Because it would have been very hard to find it at the Tatoi Club in Athens on the practice court.
Right.
But the fact that she's found it now, she's even given herself a springboard potentially to make Cancun and obviously all to play for the rest of the year. So those are very important for those type of players. They're important for us in terms of our storytelling of a tour. There is going to be an argument that a little bit less is more for tennis, and whether the season could end up shutting down in mid-October would potentially leave a little bit more anticipation heading into a new season. But as I said before, those are kind of great discussion points. But the people that are going to make those decisions are sitting in 7 different seats.
Yeah, a little bit different than us. Still, wouldn't trade it at this point. Got to give props to Caroline Dolehide making the final.
Yeah.
And probably one for her, to say the least, and doing enough to really, make the final. Obviously, she would have won the tournament, Mark. She would have loved that. But this is the type of run that's going to set you up so well long term, not just for confidence, but for ranking points, for money, obviously. What Dolehide did out of seemingly nowhere deserves to be fully commended.
As you said, I mean, I think the talent was there, and I think speaking to people that know her a little bit better than I do, they were always saying that the game's there. She's just got to kind of put all the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together, and that's what makes this sport so incredibly difficult but exciting, because you're never quite sure which player that you believe in, who you see that talent, is going to ultimately be able to find that week or that kind of that game that suddenly realize it's going to work. Well, I think whenever you've got sort of a little bit of those sort of lively conditions, you've always got to keep your sort of aspirations and expectations down for the follow-up weeks, just to see whether that kind of works in certain other places. But for her, that will certainly be that kind of fillet of confidence that she's been lacking, that the way that she played there is potentially going to be kind of uncomfortable for a lot of the good players.
Maybe this doubles renaissance too, having a little success on the doubles court, having some net skills, it's helping some players. I do want to give a shout out someone that made the semis but has been on a tear recently. Sophia Kenin is back into the top 31. She's 31 right now. San Diego makes that run to the final, gets the semis here, but it had been building all year. All the injury issues, some confidence issues as well. But for her to get to this point cumulatively is very impressive. She still is a major champion. That's never going to go away. Hasn't turned 25 yet. There's still some great tennis in front of Kenin. We're starting to see signs of that player that was once there.
Listen, I think Kenin's resume will tell you that once everything comes together, from her body to her mind to her desire, that she kind of has cleared the locker out and gets back in between the lines with just that one ambition and goal, which is to win tennis matches. She's simply too good for it not to happen. I mean, it's just a question of when rather than if. And as you say, Mitch, it's been building kind of throughout the course of the season. We kind of knew it was coming from a big portion of the results that she had. And finally, everything's clicked. She's a cut above the rest in terms of the way that she plays, the way that she competes, and when it all comes together, as it has done in recent weeks, the results are going to take care of itself. There's no need to panic for her.
It's been remarkable to see the progression, how she stayed in the fight. Obviously has had opportunities to tap out at times and just won't do it. So the desire's still there. You see it every time she plays. Well, got to get your thoughts on another controversial issue, some would say. Got the Asian swing that's in effect already started. Elena Rybakina was not happy with the quote-unquote performance buys. She's a higher seed than Sakkari, than Caroline Garcia, who played in Guadalajara. They receive buys because of the travel constraints. And, look, there's two sides to this, right? What is fair, and we can debate that, and what was told to you or what you signed up for. And it sounds like Rybakina did, and I understand her perspective, but it sounds like Mark, she knew, or at least had signed up for it. So I don't know that it's something that she can argue post after the fact, but I think the bigger discussion is one that's valid to have.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is absolutely correct. I think the reality is that they've been around, and they know that there's a potential for the performance buys to be inserted into a draw. So that was something that seemingly was a known, the thing that I'm a little unsure about, was it a known that they were going to be used suddenly at this particular event? The fact that they were within the capability of the WTA and the tournaments to use was a known, but was it sort of actually conveyed to the players that, hey, listen, this criteria, whatever that, semi-finals, final, win, we're going to use these performance buys for those players that are in the tournament the next week. And that's the bit that feels a little grey at the moment from what Elena's been saying. That doesn't feel as though that necessarily was absolutely crystal clear to her. The other argument to it is, are you penalising somebody like Rybakina, whose performances have been better than those players over 12 months, to get the ranking that you deserve, to therefore put yourself in a better position in the draw? So therefore, you are entering that tournament on the basis that you feel as though your performances over 12 months warrant a buy, rather than someone that's just had a great 5 days. And I think that's a pretty big discussion point for the players.
Yeah, that's a very, very fair point in terms of what she's done all year, and the tennis player, past and present argument that, look, you pick your schedule, you deal with the repercussions of what your schedule is. The travel benefits is a nice gift, but is it fully deserved? I see the perspective. I know that she's already qualified for the year end. It wasn't the best second half of the year for her, but she's still a top 10 player with a lot going on. So another thing to talk about this time of year.
Yeah, look. I mean, again, I think that the argument, that saying, well, she doesn't need to play these tournaments because she's made Cancun, is kind of a mute one. It's like, fine, don't play. If you don't want to play, if that's your perspective, and you want to, and from a longevity point of view, there's a big argument to say that maybe some of the players that can qualify early for the year-end champs don't play. And just go get yourself there. Obviously, you've got rankings bonuses potentially on the line if you don't play these tournaments for points that you don't pick up. If you end up being world number one at the end, you're going to obviously get a very nice Christmas present. You're still going to get a pretty nice Christmas present, even if you get to Cancun. But, what size of present are you looking for, which is what's determining whether you go to Cancun. I think, for me personally, Mitch, I think it needs, like everything in tennis, it's not necessarily crystal clear. And I think something like this, which is very, very impactful on somebody like Rybakina, needs to be absolutely nailed down, as in terms of what she should be looking at prior to the week before, to see what's going to happen, so that she doesn't sort of wake up with this bit of shock. That's all I would say. I'm not completely anti them, although Boris Becker, what was it, in '86? He ended up winning Sydney, Tokyo, and Paris in 3 different weeks, in 3 different continents, without any buys, and best of 5 finals, I think, in a couple of them as well. So the reality is, we've just created a very soft gen.
Yeah, that's a common sentiment too. The past generations will always say we've had it harder, and in tennis, they're 100% right. That is for sure. I want to get your thoughts, wrapping up here with Mark Petchey here on Tennis Channel Inside In, on some other things. We've got some title winners just today, actually, on the men's side. Karen Khachanov wins his first title in 5 years. He hasn't won a title since the Paris Masters. He's played over 100 events, and Khachanov gets the job done in Zhuhai over Nishioka. So, again, not the most loaded field, but Khachanov back in the winner's circle. I couldn't believe it was that long for him, for such a talented player.
Yeah, I mean, I knew it because obviously it was the talking point whenever he was making his big runs in recent times through the majors. So obviously that came to an end recently because of the injuries that he's suffered. But he's played some great ball in majors in the last couple of years, and so he's been there or thereabouts. It's just been a shame that he hasn't been able to put his hands on the silverware and obviously just get one of those kind of horrendous little sort of trivia questions out of the way. And I'm sure a few doubts for him, but one of the nicest guys out there on the tour, and as I say, somebody that's played fantastically well in the 12 months, fully deserving of the win. And it'll be interesting, again, a bit like Maria. Where does he go from here? How much confidence does that take? What weight of expectation on his own shoulders does that take off him? Can he really, really go that next step? And there's opportunities there.
Semifinals of both the U.S. Open in 2022 and this year's Australian Open. So he can do it on the hard courts. We know that. Alexander Zverev won today in Chengdu as well over Roman Safilin. A good 3-set match there. And for Zverev, it's just that steady climb back into where he belongs, which is the top 10. And now looking like the race to Turin is firmly within his grasp.
Mitch, it's incredible how well he's played. It was one of those ones as well where I think midway through August, we were on Tennis Channel, start looking at his ranking, which was completely skewed compared to where his live ranking was. And he was just sort of outside the world's top 10. And you were like, wow, you know, that's how good he is that he's managed to sort of pick up these wins sort of very subtly. And we've kind of not noticed. And he's already back close to being in the world's top 10, and obviously, as you say, he's gone that step further and picked up the title there. He's played great tennis. I mean, credit to him. I would imagine being that tall, needing to be as confident in your ankle with the way that Sasha loves to play from deep has taken an awful lot out of him just to get rid of the fear that's needed to play the way that he wants to play. So all credit to him that he's managed to do what he's done, and once again just underlines what just a phenomenal tennis player he is.
Can't wait to see the progression there as he gets himself, as I said, where he belongs. He's a top 10 player and he's playing like it again.
He's always good for a quote as well, so I like to see him somewhere around.
You got some rivalries now. This is great. We got some people that are just best friends. I love that. Last thing with Mark Petchey, who's been very generous with his time. We're going to see some players return for their quote-unquote hiatuses from the U.S. Open. Auger-Aliassime's coming back. We're going to see Alcaraz on the women's side, Coco Gauff for the first time since she's won her first major title. What should we expect from these top players who are coming back? You know, different forms of health, different things have happened in their lives. What should we expect from some of these players when they return to the court?
Yeah, well, that's as you say, that's the lovely thing about this time of year. We're never quite sure, are we? Holger's obviously had some big issues physically. Seen from the videos that I was watching that he looks very sort of confident. He was talking about how much he was loving hitting his forehands. But, you know, tennis players are obviously, you know, at times can be just a little fragile if things aren't 100% right. As confident as Holger is, this is going to be a few tentative steps, I think, for him. I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't a huge success as he re-enters the arena. Carlos, I have no doubts about. He's going to come back. He's going to hit the ground running. He's done it every single time that he's had a little bit of time off. And, you know, he's still had a sensational season. He's still in the learning curve of everything that he needs to do. And, of course, Coco. Don't call me Coco, call me champion. That is going to be fascinating to see her come back. And I just don't think it's going to be a problem. I've got to be honest. One of the great sporting global stories of the year, the way that she went through the summer. I mean, it just had everything that you would want about a blockbuster story. And she just seems so incredibly mature for 19 that I don't have any issues in my mind that she's going to come back. She's found the solution of the way that she needs to play. It's going to be up to all the other players on the tour to kind of counter the way that she's moving the ball around, particularly on that forehand side. I don't know, and I don't think we've seen a better athlete in women's tennis, and that's something else that's going to be a problem for a lot of the players out there. And plus, the pressure's off. She's done it. She's won a major. You know, she's going to be able to play with a certain amount of freedom that she wasn't able to play with before. She was trying to seek that elusive goal. Sky's the limit. She's an absolute gem for the women's tour. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's a few more trophies in the bag before she hangs up her rackets for the season.
It's a life-changing moment to win a major. And we know she's able to handle this better than most, if not all. And I mean, you said something there. You think best women's athlete ever to play tennis?
I think she's the best women's athlete ever to play tennis. You have to remember, I said a tweet the other day, tennis loves to spend 50% of its life looking backwards, 40% of its life predicting the future, and 10% who's the GOAT. You know, all of the things completely pointless. Nice to remember. Nice to think about what's coming, but more in a constructive way than trying to predict who's going to be sort of, you know, the next number one. But you cannot tell me that tennis, even when Steffi was around, who I think in my mind was the second greatest female women's tennis player athlete of all time, you can't tell me that the sport was played at the same speed back then that it is now. You know, the sport moves on, and I don't think that we should kind of always, you know, sort of try and kind of compare the current generation of players with ghosts, because we can't do it. They were phenomenal in their era. I think Steffi was the best in her era. I personally think that Coco Gauff, looking at her right now with the speed that the game's being played at, is the best female women's tennis athlete that we have ever seen.
Okay. Wow. That's high praise. And I don't necessarily disagree with it too. And there's a lot more left in the tank for her. Mark Petchey, this has been great. Obviously generous with your time. Always a blast to talk tennis with you. Hope to see you back on Tennis Channel soon. There is one thing though I wanted to get your opinion on quickly because
Yep.
I found a picture. I need you to explain what's going on here in the
Oh
screen.
gosh.
If you can see in the screen right now what we're looking at. This
Okay, I'm
photo,
waiting. Oh my goodness, you pulled that out of the bag. That's the sort of picture that should never see the light of day again. Um, that that photo was taken while I was still at school over here in the UK. I was junior British number one, which doesn't sound like a big achievement to anyone, I'm sure. But the whole principle of that photograph was that I played all those other sports as well. Some a little bit better than others, but
okay.
I played all of them. So you've kind of got a squash
Oh,
racket on the
field
left.
hockey?
You've got
That
that's a
field hockey?
squash. Sorry, say again, Mitch.
That field hockey too that I'm
Yes,
looking at?
yeah. So you got cricket, which I played. I was actually wicket keeper. You won't know that in the States. Anyway,
No.
it's like a backstop in baseball. You got squash, you got badminton, you got field hockey, which I absolutely loved. I was actually marginally good at that, unlike every other sport in this. Table tennis, snooker, golf. In fact, the only thing that isn't in that picture is a tennis racket because, as everybody knows, I was pathetic at that.
Oh, that's great. I was like, how many sports did this guy play and how many do I know? That's a good test for the American listeners. Like, what do you even recognize in this photo?
Exactly.
But no, it's a nice throwback. We wanted to get that into the show. Mark Petchey, always a blast. Thanks for coming on Tennis Channel Insight, and we'll do this again sometime soon.
Definitely, Mitch. Thanks a lot, man. Love being on.